Welcome back to the Convo Couch, ladies and gentlemen. I am Pasta Jardula.
And I'm Fiorella.
And Jonny Sue is still on the ones and twos. And today we have a special guest. I've been waiting to get this guy on. He is the organizer and editor at popularresistance.org. And he's also a foreign policy guy. This guy taught me a lot. We have Kevin Zeese with us today. How you doing today, Kevin?
I'm doing great. Thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate it.
Well, man, I've been waiting to get you on the show. As we were talking, the first time you were on the Convo Couch, I wasn't told Kevin Zeese would be on. I was told, hey, I'm going live with somebody who's at the Venezuelan embassy, not even one of the protectors inside. So I'm like, all right, good luck, fam. Go ahead and do it. And I put my phone on, and I see Kevin Zeese there inside the embassy speaking to Fiorella. Well, let me tell you something. She ate a lot of tuna fish that week because I refused to cook her any pasta. I was so pissed off that she had Kevin Zeese on our show and didn't tell me.
Well,
Yeah.
I appreciate you having me on during the embassy. That was a very important event. We wanted to get the word out. It was amazing how the media blacked it out.
Yeah.
And so getting on your show and others was really important to us because this was a made-for-TV event, that Venezuelan embassy. We were there for 37 days. We had 70 people there at its peak. It worked its way down to 4 as they cut off our food and our water and our electricity. So 4 people finally stood for the end, and now 4 of us are facing federal charges on that front. You can learn about those charges at defendembassyprotectors.org. If you want to get into that, but so it's great that you had me on. I'm sorry you couldn't join us. I didn't know. I didn't know at that point it was a 2-person show. I thought you were the only host. So now I get to meet the other half. I appreciate it.
Well, I've been following your stuff, and you were very informative. When you talk about popularresistance.org, in time of what was going on in the Ukraine, and it was almost like you want to talk about a made-for-television event. That was like a soft televised coup. Except nobody was at the gate watching. Nobody was paying attention. And because Obama was involved, I think a lot of people felt they couldn't be critical of him as well. Because, Obama being on the left and the Democrats, they don't like to criticize their own. It's really, really bad. But you gave us a lot of information when it came to the coup and what had happened. Can you give us
that coup got going almost the time that Popular Resistance got going.
Okay.
Popular Resistance came out of the Occupy movement. And after the Occupy movement ended, we got together a bunch of other Occupy organizers and said, what do we do to keep the movement going? And they decided we needed to have a site of our own where the movement news can be reported, where actions can be planned. And that Ukraine coup, which began like in December 2013 and continued into the early part of the next year, 2014, was really an amazing coup. I mean, we started seeing it. Wow, look at these. This is an amazing coup. How are these people doing this?
Yeah.
We didn't know at the time the U.S. was behind it. That became pretty evident when the U.S. started to admit it. You saw John McCain out there, giving food to the protesters. Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State, who said the U.S. has spent $5 billion to build the opposition in Ukraine. She was out there with the protesters. It became very obvious this was a U.S. coup. In fact, it's the most obvious successful coup the U.S. has had in decades. And people still don't believe it was a coup, but it clearly was. It's incredible, actually, how much the U.S. was involved. The Poroshenko became the president. And if you go into WikiLeaks and look up Ukraine and Poroshenko, you'll find that he was known as OU for the CIA, our Ukraine insider. He was the CIA's guy. He was a longtime informant for the CIA about Ukraine, and he became president.
Yeah.
And then the prime minister was Yates, and he was mentioned in a telephone call between Victoria Nuland and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine. Who should we put him? Yates, and Yates became prime minister. And then you had the foreign minister, the finance minister, was a longtime State Department official. She moved to Ukraine after the Orange Revolution in the early 2000s, became a hedge funder there, an investment person, and she became the vehicle for a lot of that CIA money that went into Ukraine. And
Who
so
was
the
that?
day
Was that
that she's
Chalupa?
made foreign minister, the president, OU, our Ukraine insider, makes her a citizen so she can become the finance minister.
Yeah.
So she's our finance minister. And so there was a total U.S. takeover of the government, and yet some people still don't believe it was a coup.
Yeah. Could you hear us good right here?
I hear you fine.
Perfect. So you want to ask who the players involved? Sorry
Okay.
about that.
So, what did do you want to go?
Well, I asked about which U.S. players were involved as far as because I think a lot of people when they talk about the impeachment when it comes to the Ukraine, they don't realize that it could be a form of distraction because a lot of players within the U.S. government. I even just heard that Rick Perry might have had some bad dealings involved. What other U.S. players were involved? Because we heard these accusations, but can you just give us a little bit of light about who they are?
I mentioned a few already who became prime minister, president, and finance minister. But I'll say that the person who was the point man for this coup was Joe Biden. Yeah, he was Obama's guy on the Ukraine coup, which makes it so kind of bizarre that the Democrats chose this impeachment process to be about Ukraine. Right. Because they had to know that at some point this was going to go to the U.S. Senate where the Republicans are in control, and they would be able to bring up Joe Biden, Obama, and other Democrats. They're not going to focus on Rick Perry or Republicans. They're going to focus on the Democrats who were involved in this. John Kerry was involved. In fact, John Kerry's one of his stepson's college roommate was put on the board of this gas company along with Hunter Biden. And so you have John Kerry, you have Joe Biden, and that's the two Secretary of States for, and Vice President. I mean, it's crazy that you'd have this kind of involvement, and the Democrats pick this as their topic for impeachment. Don't they know there's going to be blowback? Yeah. I mean, the crazy thing about this impeachment thing, and I don't want to jump ahead to that too far, but just on related to Ukraine, is when it gets to the Senate Republicans make the rules for how that trial will proceed. They will decide who can be called as witnesses. Oh. And so they're talking about calling Joe Biden. They're talking about calling Hunter Biden. Exactly. Why not call John Kerry? Why not his finance advisor who went on that board with Hunter Biden? I mean, this could be a major blowback for the Democrats when this impeachment trial gets to the U.S. Senate. And so, I mean, the involvement was massive. $5 billion spent by the United States to build opposition in Ukraine to the the elected government. And you had that this was a democracy. The government was pro-Russia, was not willing to go toward Europe, did not want NATO in there yet. And that really is the big issue in Ukraine. This is about the Russia conflict. Russia's on the border of Ukraine, and the U.S. has been gradually spreading NATO across the southern border of Russia, and they want Ukraine to be part of that NATO control over Russia. And now, so far, Ukraine has not agreed to that yet. And I wonder how this Trump fiasco of this phone call is going to maybe even prevent that. Who knows how it's going to play out. But so $5 billion were spent to build an opposition movement by the United States over many years. And that's what led to this Ukraine coup. And the Ukraine coup is really about geopolitical positioning. They have a lot of gas. They have amazing agriculture. But the real issue is, look on the map. That is what the real issue is. The U.S. wants military bases for NATO along the Russian border, and that's where they hope this heads. Putin has played this very well so far to prevent a lot of these goals, but that is the long-term goal of the United States. And the U.S. plays a long-term game. The U.S. is persistent in pursuing these objectives.
Now, wouldn't you say that other people like Adam Schiff and Nancy Pelosi were involved in a way, because Adam Schiff did attend several dinners with several of these oligarchs?
Well, no question. I mean, that's the thing about Ukraine. It really infects so many Democrats. And there. By the way, the Republicans in the Senate are talking about calling Schiff as a witness. Yeah. So they're well aware of this. And Giuliani has been talking about having a lot of dirt on the Democrats in Ukraine. So I think we're going to see a lot come out that we're not aware of yet. Right. The blowback for this, Trump is a terrible president. Right. I'm not a Trump fan, and I'd like to see him removed from office. I think that the Democrats should be able to beat him if they actually do what their voters support, which is a improved Medicare for all, a Green New Deal, taxes on the wealthy, they put forward that kind of agenda, Sanders-like agenda, they will beat Donald Trump in the election. This impeachment approach is actually in the end going to help Donald Trump.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I hate to say it. The Democrats did not accomplish what they needed to accomplish as this impeachment inquiry was going on in the House. The goal that the Democrats needed to accomplish were two things. One, they needed to move public opinion in favor of impeachment. That didn't happen. Mm-hmm. They had the whole, they had complete control of the inquiry. They controlled who the witnesses were. They got the media coverage they needed, and yet they didn't move public opinion. The second thing they needed to do was divide the Republicans. They need to get some division, some fissures that they can build on among Republican elected officials. They didn't do that. Republicans have stayed solidly behind Donald Trump. So far, this has been an epic fail for the Democrats. And if you look at impeachment inquiry like the Clinton impeachment, it can backfire. Clinton left office at 65% approval rating.
Yeah.
After his impeachment.
Yeah.
And what's going to happen in the Senate is the Senate's going to definitely not convict. They're going to be controlling who testifies. They're going to be controlling the whole trial. And you're going to see this focus on, well, why was Donald investigating corruption in Ukraine? And they'll investigate, what was he investigating? And that's when all this Democrat blowback is going to come out. Yeah. That's my prediction. Maybe I might be wrong. The future is hard to predict. But Ukraine is filled with so much of a mess, so much Democrat involvement from top leaders in the House to Obama administration officials to State Department officials, to even children of John Kerry. John Kerry's financial advisor, his son's, his stepson's roommate in college, and then Hunter Biden getting millions of dollars for something he's not qualified for. It's just an embarrassment.
Well, let's talk a little. Let's dive a little bit into this right here, right now, because I think you kind of hit it on the nose, and I think a lot of people are moving in the same way, realizing that this impeachment is just dynamite for the Democrats. But I think the reason why they did choose to impeach is to try to cover up for their own crimes, because, like you said, the Republicans are going to control the Senate. There's a serious paper trail on all of them, even down to Adam Schiff, what we just talked about with Igor Pasternak here at home, right around the corner, throwing $2,500 a plate fundraisers for the guy, and then after the coup, after the regime change, which was a bloody regime change nonetheless, he gets defense contracts in the Ukraine. Hunter Biden, all these people. Isn't this really the Democrats about hiding their corruption, hoping to bleed out the clock, let this distraction go on, not look what's going on to the Ukraine, and then get to the election time? I mean, isn't that what their goal is right now? I see this urgency from them. Maybe they're trying to hide this and just kind of cover this up.
I don't see how this covers it up. I mean, I think by focusing on Ukraine, they're almost inviting it. I mean, if they're trying to cover it up, it's a wrong strategy,
right? Because
this will go to the Senate in a trial. Now, they could avoid the trial. What they could do is continue to pound on impeachment. Okay, you had these impeachment inquiries so far. Schiff will come out with his report. Then you can send it to the Judiciary Committee. Judiciary Committee can then hold additional hearings. There's now some court decisions in favor of forcing Trump's former chief of staff to testify. Bolton may be forced to testify. That could get interesting if the Democrats can keep it in the House for that long, so that those can become witnesses. That can help the Democrats. But what they should do, because they know the Senate's a foregone conclusion, is censor Trump. Come to a yes, he has committed impeachable offenses, but we're going to beat him in the election. We don't want to take away that power from the voters. We're going to censor Trump at the House and leave it at that, because then the Senate doesn't get jurisdiction.
Right.
Because the Senate jurisdiction is where what you're worried about, you claim the Democrats want to cover up. Well, in the Senate, the cover up ends, because in the Senate it's Mitch McConnell and his allies calling the witnesses.
Yeah.
And that's going to be a whole different ballgame than the U.S. House of Representatives.
And I have a question for you. Knowing what you know about the what happened in Ukraine in 2014 and knowing the players, do you believe that Donald Trump had any reason to actually go and search and kind of investigate what was going on in Ukraine? Because a lot of people come and tell me, well, he violated the Constitution. It's about the Constitution. It's about, setting a precedent. Do you believe he violated any rules, especially regarding the Constitution?
Well, I don't see it as a constitutional. I do see it as a Federal Election Commission's issue. I mean, Donald Trump did seek assistance from a foreign government for his campaign. It could be argued investigating Biden would support his campaign. And that would violate FEC rules, which do not allow foreign assistance to our campaigns. So I don't know what the constitutional claim is there. I mean, the Constitution is very vague on what requires impeachment: high crimes and misdemeanors. High crimes and misdemeanors. That's a very vague. High crimes is not even a real term. Does that mean felony? Does that mean? I'm not sure what it means. And so it's a very vague term that's very flexible. So I would say that, like every president before him, Trump has committed impeachable offenses. I mean, but we don't impeach presidents for war crimes. We don't impeach presidents for going to war without congressional approval. We don't impeach presidents for violating international law. Every U.S. war for this century has violated international law. But we don't impeach presidents for that. I guess those don't fit in the high crimes and misdemeanor category as much as they should. So, my view on what Trump did, he was definitely trying to get dirt on Joe Biden.
You think so?
And that was, yeah. I mean, it's obvious he was trying to get dirt on Joe Biden.
You don't think he was trying to find the roots of Russiagate more than anything, with CrowdStrike being there to kind of clear his name more than anything? I mean, I think that's what he wanted. The argument can be made that it was in his purview to investigate corruption there, especially since these Ukrainian officials were trying to give this information about Burisma and all these things. I mean, that could be the argument, but I think he was really trying to expose what happened with Russiagate and clear his name more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. I think you're right about that. I'm not sure more than anything. I think he was very focused on Biden as well, but I do think that the Russiagate has been under his skin. It's been an abusive investigation since the beginning of his presidency, or at least since he fired Comey. And there's lots of questions about CrowdStrike at the DNC. There's lots of questions about those DNC emails. And so those, he's very concerned about that. I have real problems with the United States interventionist approach to other countries. Sure, there's corruption in Ukraine. There's also corruption in the United States. There's also corruption in the UK, corruption in France. There's corruption in you pick a country. Is it United States purview to investigate that corruption? I think that's part of the problem is U.S. intervention, the interventionist approach of U.S. foreign policy. And so while he wanted to get at the cause of Russiagate, I think he had other ways to do that. Department of Justice is currently investigating some of these issues. I think we'll see reports from DOJ that will be about the root causes of the roots of Russiagate. I mean, Russiagate has been a dismal failure for the Democrats. Russiagate, it was obvious when Russiagate, the whole idea began, that Hillary Clinton had to find an excuse on why she lost to Donald Trump. She needed to come up with some rationale, and blaming Russia rather than looking in the mirror and seeing herself was a lot easier. And this is why the Democrats are constantly failing. They fail to look at themselves in the mirror. They fail to honestly evaluate themselves. The reason why Hillary Clinton lost was because she has a long track record, 35 years, supporting wars, supporting Wall Street, supporting Walmart, of being an elite Democrat that responds to the wealthy.
Yeah.
She's not a populist left candidate. And she lost because the people were tired of elites. Yeah. Now, Donald Trump was able to paint himself as a populist, as a millionaire populist. That's it's pretty impressive politics. But there's no way Hillary could escape her reputation and her history, and that's why the Democrats lost. They couldn't face that, so they pursued this Russiagate investigation. It didn't produce much from Mueller's work all those years. Did not produce much. There were some indictments, but not about the election, and so that was a failure. Now I think Ukrainegate is their next try, and I think Ukrainegate, when it gets to the Senate, it's going to be a very different story than what we see in the House.
Yeah,
exactly. Are we ready to shift to Bolivia?
Oh no, I want to talk about the impeachment real quick. Because we didn't talk about Maria Yovanovitch, because I asked you about this. How do you say it?
Yovanovitch. Yeah, you got it right.
And because this impeachment hearing has been a circus. I mean, there's no credible witnesses. Fiona Hill coming into play where she's gotten everything wrong, and she's just there to secure the narrative by the Democrats. You know what I'm saying? But they made this woman, Maria Yovanovitch, out to be a hero. Now, she's the only credible witness in my mind that's taken the stand because she was actually there. But we've read a lot of things. There was John Solomon, I think he did some reporting that Yovanovitch not only denied visas for some Ukrainian officials, I believe it was Letenko, trying to come to the States and talk about what was going on with Burisma and all these other countries, these other companies, but she also sent him and now it's denied, but she sent a do not prosecute list to the Ukrainian. Like, in other words, you can't touch these people. These are the untouchables. Yet the Democrats are trying to make her out to be this long-standing hero. And I hate to bag on her, but I think she's part of the problem.
Well, your microphone passed out for a second there, but yeah, I think she is one of a handful of people the Democrats are trying to turn into heroes. I mean, Sunderland, I mean, I think he was an interesting witness. I mean, as a Trump donor, millionaire donor, $1 million donor, and then coming out as an ambassador and switching his story and saying that, yes, there was a quid pro quo. They were trying to get information on Biden, and that was and information on the source of Russiagate, and that so he came out, changed his position. That was, I think, a very interesting witness that also causes trouble for Donald Trump, and it'll be interesting to see him picked apart by cross-examination in the Senate. And you know, the other witnesses too, they were very anti-Russia witnesses. Yeah. And they're claiming that the whole Ukraine source of funding for the campaign for support for Clinton was a falsehood created by Russia. I mean, so there's a lot there that is going to fall apart when this gets under a different microscope in the U.S. Senate. And so the Democrats took a very risky path by choosing Ukraine, a country where they have had so much involvement in a very open coup, and so much involvement in adding to the corruption. Yeah. As you mentioned, saying a do not prosecute list, adding to the corruption in Ukraine by the U.S. after they took over in this coup. Yeah. So this is a very, when you have so many other alternatives to go after Trump for, and also a campaign you can run where you could actually defeat Trump. He's a very unpopular president. He's defeatable. Instead, they're taking this approach, and I think it's going to backfire and hurt them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I really think that they didn't have a choice as far as, because that's where Donald Trump was looking. He was looking into the Ukraine. So they were just trying to shift the attention from what happened into Ukraine to what Trump did in the Ukraine. I thought it was at that point, to me, it's like, oh, you guys are as guilty as sin now. All those things you did, you really did those things because that's why you're using this here to try to change the narrative of Ukraine. But that's, Fiorella has one last question before we get on to Bolivia.
I just feel like they would have impeached him on emoluments, or they would have impeached him on him, trying to push a coup on Venezuela. I mean, there's so many things you can impeach him on, but the reason they chose this is to avoid accountability, it seems. So isn't it the people of Ukraine, though, who are suffering the most? Because knowing what we know, shouldn't the people like Biden and the U.S. players be held accountable for what they're doing?
Well, the people of the Ukraine were obviously not very happy with their government. Zelensky came in with a landslide 70% victory. He then called for elections for the parliament, and they were all removed, and his party put in place there. The people of Ukraine were not happy with the direction the government had been going under Poroshenko, the U.S. OU, our Ukraine insider. And so, the people of Ukraine are suffering. Their economy is shrinking. They have a civil war going on between East Ukraine, the Russian part of Ukraine, and Kiev and the rest of Ukraine, Western Ukraine. They have the Western Ukrainian Nazi regime has way too much power since the coup. And so, the people are definitely suffering. And the U.S. should be held accountable. But the U.S. should be held accountable not just, for many coup d'etats and regime change campaigns. Look what they're doing to the poor Venezuelan people. 40,000 people have died in the last 3 years as a result of U.S. Economic sanctions, which are really illegal, unilateral, coercive measures under international law, 40,000 deaths. The people of Iran,
Yeah.
since 1979, have been suffering because of U.S. economic war and the regime change efforts there. The people in Syria have been going through a civil war for 7 years. And Obama, unleashed the U.S. through the CIA and then through a more open campaign in Syria. And so, yes, the U.S. needs to begin to be held. In fact, that is the key goal, I think, for the world in this century, is finding ways to hold U.S. accountable under international law.
Yeah.
International courts exist. There's the International Criminal Court, which could prosecute U.S. officials for war crimes. They were starting to investigate a alleged U.S. war crime in Afghanistan, and John Bolton threatened the ICC with sanctions.
Mm-hmm.
So accountability is key. I think your question is right on point. Accountability is key. When we develop an international system of justice that can hold not just African dictators accountable, which is all the ICC seems to be able to do, but can hold the United States accountable, then we'll begin to see an end to the rampaging U.S. wars around the world.
Yeah.
But accountability is key.
Yeah.
Creating a system of laws, international laws that are enforceable, is the way we end reliance on war and militarism. So yes, I think that's the key approach. Hold the U.S. accountable.
We should transition to Bolivia when you talk about the ICC, because and when you want to talk about sanctions, for me, what really hit home was Bill Clinton putting sanctions on Iraq, and I think it was like 100,000 children died because of those sanctions, and I thought it was just so awful. But when you talk about the ICC, when I first started following you, I remember listening to you about Nicaragua. You were talking to Lee Camp, I think, about Nicaragua, and you had pointed out that the NED had been funding the opposition in Nicaragua for a while, and the NED is actually funded through American taxpayers. Now, we hear about all these other groups right now. We hear about the NED, the OPCW, and now the OAS, where we have actually a video of Cory Booker standing behind the OAS. Kevin, you got to look at some of the press conferences we did on the CONVO couch. Go over there. He literally stands behind the OAS.
All of them.
These seem to be an extension, these groups, of the CIA and the deep state. I don't know if you can say the deep state, whatever. What can you say to the people out there watching that and prove to them and show them that these are American taxpayer dollars paying for this?
Well, the National Endowment for Democracy, the NED, is basically the overt CIA, and it's funded completely by the State Department. Whenever I see actions around the world, like the Hong Kong protests or the Nicaraguan protests or Venezuela, one of the first places I look is what is the NED funding in that country, because that often is the first step of telling the story. Now, Nicaragua is a very interesting situation. I mean, many people in the United States were fooled by it. The Sandinistas have been in power now. Ortega's been in power now for quite a while. And when someone's in power that long, there are often divisions in a country. And if that was true with Evo Morales as well, his popularity, he still won by a large majority in that first round of voting, but it was much less majority than he won in previous elections. When someone's in power a long time, there's divisions. And so, and for the United States, if you look at NED funding in Nicaragua, it goes back 10, 15 years. The U.S., as I said, plays a long game. The U.S. is persistent. And so the U.S. has been building opposition in Nicaragua for a long time. And what the NED funds are nonprofit organizations or NGOs, non-governmental organizations in Nicaragua. So human rights groups, women's groups, environmental groups, democracy groups. And so then when this time for a color revolution begins, then the U.S. media goes to those human rights groups in Nicaragua and says, what's the human rights violations? And of course, they're funded by NED, and they tell the U.S. story. Same with women's groups or democracy groups. And so you get all these sources of information that people on the progressive side of the spectrum would believe a human rights group or a women's group or an environmental group or a democracy group. That sounds great to us on the left. And so I think it's very interesting to see NED funding. And I think that you could see that was with Hong Kong. That's another area where there's a lot of confusion right now, what's going on in Hong Kong. And we see our role at Popular Resistance very often is to, as quickly as possible, check the narrative.
Exactly.
And one thing we check first off is NED funding. The second thing we check is who benefits. So these Hong Kong protests, who benefits by this new law? The U.S. out of these protests came this Hong Kong Democracy Act, which requires the U.S. to intervene in Hong Kong.
Yeah.
To monitor China and report on China's involvement in Hong Kong. And so who benefits? The United States benefits from that. Yeah. And so you look at who's behind it and who benefits from it, and you very quickly start to see whether this is a real, legitimate. And now in Hong Kong, and in all these places it's true, but in Hong Kong, there are legitimate reasons for people to protest. Hong Kong is neoliberal capitalism at its most extreme.
Exactly.
Yes.
It is so abusive. The 10 wealthiest people are real estate developers, and yet in Hong Kong you have the highest rents in the world. People pay thousands of dollars for apartments the size of a parking lot.
Yep.
In Hong Kong. They have jobs that have no low-paying, long hours, and no long-term viability, no long-term advancement. They have high poverty levels, a gigantic wealth divide. Hong Kong is neoliberal capitalism at its worst. And so there's lots of reasons people protest. But they come out and protest, that's understandable. But then when you see them protest with the American flag, with the UK flag, with the sign that says "Trump save us,"
I know,
and then focusing on China, when China actually has no control over Hong Kong or limited control, because the agreement with the UK in 1997, when Hong Kong was transferred back to China, was that until 2047, the Chinese can't change their political system or their economic system. So if you feel like the economy is unfair, it's not China's fault. That's the system put in place by the UK when it was a colony of the United Kingdom. And so the protests, there are real good reason for protests, but the protests were manipulated. And when you look at NED funding, you'll see that the organizations that organized the protests were funded by the NED. So it's not surprising they're going after China. Why China? Because the new U.S. national security strategy is no longer war on terrorism, it's great power conflict. And the primary target there is China. Yeah. China is going to be the largest economy in the world. Even if you look at purchasing power parity, gross national product, PPP GDP, China already is the largest in the world. And if you look at the Belt and Road Initiative linking China to Europe, through the Middle East and Africa, they are going to dominate the economy in the 21st century. So the U.S. is very worried about China. And so Hong Kong is critical. The U.S. wants an independent Hong Kong.
Exactly.
Now, I know we didn't come on here to talk about Hong Kong, but all these issues are so connected.
Yeah, no,
we're there, buddy. We're there.
You're entirely right. And I think
we
could do a separate show on Hong Kong with Pasta because that's his favorite topic. But I'm going to tie it back to Bolivia because part of that, too, was the lithium that Bolivia has access to, and they were talking to China about it. So, I mean, all of this can be tied back to U.S. and Western imperialism and money-eyed interests. But I want to talk about Evo Morales because Evo Morales has now been accused of high crimes by this usurpatory government that's taken place. And everybody's wondering, will he be able to return to Bolivia? Because it seems like if he does, he'll suffer the same fate as a lot of his cabinet members and his supporters have, where they've been jailed, literally physically attacked, their houses have been burned down. What do you think is next for Evo Morales?
Well, Bolivia is a very interesting situation, and when I heard that I saw the initial signs of attempts at a color revolution before the vote. They attacked the political mass party's headquarters, set it on fire. And so you already start to see these kind of pressures developing in Bolivia before the election. They were already calling the election corrupt before the vote happened. So they were really prepared. Now, I first thought there's no way that Evo Morales would be knocked out because he was politically popular.
So strong.
So strong.
Oh.
I didn't realize how much his military had been contaminated by the United States, and that's now become evident. $1 million payoffs for generals, $100,000 payers for lower officials. The general who told Evo to resign has now moved to the United States. I mean, it's amazing, and it's been. You're right, by the way. It has been a very violent coup. That I know if you saw that video of that mayor who was taken by the coup mob, cut her hair, pour red all over her, burned the municipal center, made her walk through the street barefoot. I mean, it was just gross. It was like a Game of Thrones scene.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Yeah.
It was just like Game of Thrones. It's crazy. And then Evo's sister's house was set on fire. Exactly. So it was a very violent coup. And Evo was warned that there was a $50,000 reward on his head. That if he was killed, the person who did it would get a $50,000 reward. So he went to Mexico. Thanks to AMLO, the president of Mexico, saved his life. Evo says he's going to come back stronger. And I know from the history of Bolivia that the indigenous forces are very powerful. They make up 60 to 70% of the population of Bolivia. And you cannot run that country if that force is against you. They have removed previous presidents, and so I don't think this coup is over by any stretch of the imagination. And I think you're right about the issue of lithium. That's just one of the very important natural resources that Bolivia has. They also have a very plentiful gas supply. That was the old issue when the indigenous removed previous presidents. It was over the issue of selling gas to the United States corporations at low cost. That's what threw the previous administrations out before Evo then was elected and nationalized the gas industry. Yeah. But lithium, the U.S. and Evo had entered a contract with the Chinese government to give them 49% control over the lithium corporation. And that would have been a major benefit to China, which is moving very quickly toward electric cars and electric transport generally. Bolivia also controls the natural resources necessary for computer screens. It's a very wealthy country in natural resources. The question is, who's going to get that wealth?
Yeah.
The people of Bolivia or U.S. and other Western corporations. Yeah. This coup government is going to put the U.S. corporations in charge. I expect if they stay in power, we'll see IMF loans that put the country in debt to provide further control. But I don't think this is over yet. This coup came quickly. Evo is alive and speaking. His allies are still in Bolivia. I don't think this is over yet. We're going to see how this ends up, but the people of Bolivia are too strong to allow this to happen.
I don't think people understand in the States the severity of these coups, that if we stand behind these coups or we let these happen and we don't call them out, individuals, corporations make tons of money stealing the natural resources from these countries. Evo Morales was going to nationalize that lithium, and that money was going to go to the people. That's why I haven't eaten a banana in 2 years because of what's going on in Honduras, because it was the people who were just getting starved of those natural resources while these corporations are making money hand over fist. Now, transitioning to the people who got it right here. Bernie Sanders immediately called it a coup, which was great. He said it appears to be a coup. He didn't go in depth into it, but he said the military is taking over. It's a coup. Tulsi Gabbard took a week, studied the information, and got it right and said this is definitely a coup, period, and the U.S. doesn't need to be involved. On the other side, we have people like Marco Rubio, Ted Cruz, who were involved. How deeply are they involved, and what price should they pay if they, in fact, were talking to the oppositions of these bloody coups?
And they're not just involved in Bolivia. They're involved in Venezuela. And by the way, that's one that Sanders has gotten wrong. I hate to say.
Oh, we know that. We know that.
We know.
Sanders
we know that. We know that.
Very disappointed with him on that. He knows better because in the 1980s, He was involved in the Nicaraguan and the anti-Contra,
Yeah.
you know, that whole effort. So he's aware
Yeah,
of
yeah.
U.S. So I was very disappointed he got Venezuela wrong. In fact, he said some really stupid things.
No, we know.
Like
We know.
on the CNN town hall when he said they should have an election in Venezuela. This time
Yeah.
have election monitors. Well, there were more than 300 election monitors in Venezuela when they had the last election. I was there.
It's one of the
I was in
most
that
democratic
Yeah.
elections that.
Yeah.
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 Exactly. So Bolivia, yes, the usual suspects of coup plotters in the U.S. Senate and House are involved, and that includes not just Republicans but Democrats as well. Sanders is unusual, and Tulsi's unusual in that they got this right. So I applaud them. I applaud them for that. And my hope is that if Sanders is able to get the nomination, which I know the Democratic Party elites are trying to prevent, but he keeps rising in the polls. He seems to have come to life after his recent heart event. He seems even stronger now. And Warren is dropping. Warren really blew it with her comments on Medicare for All, where she created a two-step process over multiple years and really showed that she's not serious about Medicare for All. If you look at her poll numbers, you'll see that they have declined drastically ever since she took that wrong position. Medicare for All is an essential position, I think, for the Democratic nominee. Of course, the Democratic elites are trying to avoid that. So I think on Bolivia, thankfully Sanders and Tulsi got it right. And the usual suspects are playing their role. In fact, with Hong Kong, you can see pictures of the Hong Kong protest movement leaders meeting with Rubio and the other coup plotters
Jimmy Lai.
in the U.S. So no question. It gets more and more obvious. We're having so many more coups these days, it seems like, and I think Trump is more sloppy about it, so they're more open. It's getting more and more obvious who is on the side of regime change in the U.S., who are the interveners, and who are those who are beginning to say hands off. I was very pleased to see a number of Democrats in the House send a letter openly calling for this coup and to restore democracy in Bolivia. That's what needs to happen.
So with Venezuela, there were clear money ties to U.S. involvement in the coup. It was also very blatant at the embassy, as you experienced. But with Bolivia, it wasn't as immediate. It was more about the OAS. Do we have any actual money ties between Bolivia and the United States? I know I listened to some of the audio files that in Spanish that were talking about Marco Rubio and Ted Cruz. But do we have any actual money ties besides the OAS?
Well, other than the payoffs to the generals, that's the only thing that's come out is the payoffs to the generals. Evo Morales had kicked out NED and USAID.
Okay.
He did not allow them to operate in Bolivia, so he knew that those were the coup agencies, and he kicked them out. And you were right. In Venezuela, there was much more open involvement of the money flow. And again, Trump is so open about the Venezuela coup. He talked openly about it back in 2017. He talked about military attack in Venezuela. And luckily that gave the Venezuelans enough warning to prepare for it. Now, Venezuela, unlike Bolivia, has a very deeply educated military. I mean, Hugo Chavez came out of the military. And so that military is not as easily bought off or corrupted by the U.S. and its resources. And Bolivia didn't have that. I was kind of shocked that Evo, because he kicked out NED and kicked out USA, that he didn't have his generals under control. That's kind of unfortunate and shocking. Now, in Venezuela, not only is the military under control, it's a strong force, it's 200,000 size military, but they've also developed a civilian militia of more than 2 million armed and trained. Yeah. And that ranges from teenagers to grandmothers. And so if there was ever a U.S. invasion of Venezuela, it would be a impossible task for the U.S. to take over Venezuela. The people are too well educated on U.S. imperialism. They're too well aware of U.S. tactics, and they are armed and prepared for a U.S. military invasion. Can you imagine 2 million civilian militia, 200,000 troops, National Guard, and police? The population is 30 million people. 2 million of them are civilian militia. That means they're on every corner. U.S. troops will be seeing armed civilians ready to combat them. It's an impossible task to take over Venezuela.
And just real quick, I just want to comment on that because I think that was Evo Morales' mistake, was that he didn't have a successor or a series of people. And this is the thing that I look at, like people like Bernie Sanders and movements in general. You have to build successors. And in Venezuela, that exists. That existed, as you pointed out, not only in the military, but others that could take over. Chavez had Maduro and so on and so forth. And I feel like Morales needs to build upon that because that was kind of like where the line broke, so to speak.
Well, you know, I don't know Bolivia as well as I know Venezuela. I've never been to Bolivia. I've been to Venezuela twice in the last year. And one of the great one of the great experiences I had in Venezuela was going to the taping of their most popular TV show. It's a weekly show. It's 5 hours long. And it is a show that is a mixture of Saturday Night Live, music, comedy. And it's the person who runs it is one of the most powerful politicians in the country, the head of the National Constituent Assembly. And the centerpiece of the show is he has these boards up, and on each board he has index cards, 80 index cards of stories. He goes to each index card and tells the story, a political story. It was good news, bad news, and the electrical attack. Those are the three categories of story. He went through 80 stories and described them. So the population got deep political education. And this is the most popular show on TV in Venezuela. They made us. We thought we'd just go to the check it out, stay in the back and watch a little bit of it and then leave. But they put us in the front and center, and then they had each one of us stand up and wave to the crowd. And so the next day, all of the waiters and service people knew who we were. We walked around town, people knew us because it's the most popular show in Venezuela. And so that's the kind of deep political education they have. They've done that in their military. And there was a whole section of the show that were military people. And they were dancing to the music and laughing at the jokes. Guaido was they mocked Guaido. They mocked Trump. They mocked Bolton. It was an amazing show. But that's what it takes. Revolution is a process, and part of that process is really educating your public, educating your people in your government and your military. I don't know the situation in Bolivia as deeply. I know the indigenous people are well educated. I know Evo was a union leader of the Coca Union, and that's how he got his start. So that's a very well-organized group of people. But obviously he didn't have his military under control, and that was his Achilles heel.
Yeah, absolutely. What was the name of the show in Venezuela?
Hit It With a Club. Hit It With a Club. And on the front of the main speaker was a slogan that says, "We say nothing bad about Chavez here." And the other slogan was, "Always loyal, never a traitor." Those are the two slogans in front of the on the podium. So it's an amazing show, really an amazing show. And you know, Chavez had a show like that when he was in power. He had and his show now didn't have a certain number, and it was a little bit different. He was like a great professor, and he would start a story and he'd talk for hours. It would go around and around and come back to the conclusion. So he was educating the public as he was building his power. And that's continued under Maduro and under the current government.
Hey, we have a couple super chat contributions I want to peel through real quick because you can talk a little bit on them. Thank you for the super chat contribution from Ren Sten, and it is always appreciated on the couch. The big issue: gamers in America are supporting the protest, I'm assuming in Hong Kong, because of the PR nightmare with the gaming company, but none know about the NED funding. I guess the gamers got more stakes in the game than us. I don't know.
Well, no, it's these are all complicated situations, and it really that's why Popular Resistance, we really try to get the truth out as quickly as we can. We saw that we didn't do that in Syria, and that caused a lot of divisions among the left over the U.S. role in Syria. Yeah. There was a lot of anti-Assad views, and that caused a lot of disruption in our communities. And so we've really tried now to as quickly as we can get the truth out when we see these kind of things happening. And if you really want to understand something, you mentioned that you can go to Popular Resistance and almost see in live time what happened. The way to do that, if you just a Google search, it just comes out in no order. But if you go to popularresistance.org/tag/Bolivia or /Ukraine, then you'll see all the stories in order. The most recent first, and you can go all the way to the beginning of the Ukraine story. Yeah. If you go popularresistance.org/tag/Ukraine, you can see the whole Ukraine story unfold as that. We put up about 15 stories a day on movements around the world and on movement issues around the world. And so if you subscribe to our daily digest, it's free. You get about 10 to 15 stories every day. It's about a short few lines of each story. If you're interested in the story, you can click on it and get the full story. But we provide a total history of Venezuela, of Bolivia, of Ukraine, Hong Kong, all these issues. We are trying to keep that history so people can be informed, because we think that education is the foundation of all movements. That's the first step.
You know, you want to hear something funny, too, because along with you guys in the Gray Zone, I would listen to some libertarians and right-wingers when it comes to interventionists. I would go to the Ron Paul sites and whatnot, because they always linked up to finances. And I always say this is the connection we need. This is the what's the word? Let me out here. The group.
Sure. No question. Cross those political barriers.
The bridge.
And we can.
The coalition.
I was Ralph Nader's. I was Ralph Nader's spokesperson in 2004, and he's a big believer in right-left alliances. And so we worked together to form a right-left alliance called Come Home America that brought together libertarians and traditional conservatives along with anti-interventionist people on the left. And when I ran for office in 2006 as a Green for the U.S. Senate against Ben Cardin, I was not only nominated by the Green Party, I was nominated by the Populist Party, which is a Nader party, and the Libertarian Party. And the Libertarians nominated me because of my anti-war views and my anti-drug war views. Those were the issues that got them to support me. And so the first question I had from their Central Committee was, how can we nominate someone who believes in socialized medicine to be the Libertarian candidate? But they did nominate me, and so I think I'm the only person ever nominated for a statewide race by both the Libertarians and the Green Party.
That's interesting.
So I agree that kind of cross-partisanship.
The coalition was the word I was looking for. My tongue gets stuck.
That coalition. Sure, coalition.
We have another Super Chat contribution from Ren Sten. Thank you so much. Kevin, he says the generals in Bolivia were trained in America under the FBI, according to the Gray Zone.
Yes,
and this is why they were so bought off quickly.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. The Gray Zone is a fantastic source. They have done such incredible work. They have, there are a number of reporters there who I know most. I think I know all of them. Some are from RT, some are from the Real News. They've gone on to work with Max at the Gray Zone, and they are doing just fantastic work. They are on top of all these regime change stories, and they, I think the reason why they're going after Max in this absurd prosecution around the Venezuelan embassy, a few days before that prosecution, he put out the story about how USAID is spending $42 million of USAID funds to fund the coup in Venezuela.
Yeah.
And a couple of days later, he's arrested.
Yeah.
So I can highly recommend the Gray Zone as an excellent source for information on that challenges the corporate media narrative. And I think you'll have a much better understanding of reality if you follow the Gray Zone, Popular Resistance, and a few other sources. They do great work.
And let's not forget that Max Blumenthal is not only just the management of savagery. He'll go after Barack Obama, because people talk about talking to Assad was the worst thing. He was the megalomaniac, but yet we were funding the serious jihadists in Syria, ISIS and whatnot. And he also goes after the Trump administration as well, and he holds them accountable. There is nobody escaping accountability when it comes to Max Blumenthal. He takes no sides, and I think that's also why they went after arrest him, is because he was critical of what President Trump is doing, the way he's amped up the bombing as well. So.
Exactly right. He's criticized both parties. He's not a fan of either militarist interventionist party.
I just wanted to ask one last question. We've kind of had WikiLeaks release a lot of data on the Syrian chemical attacks, but simultaneously we are still having a congresswoman and combat veteran in Tulsi Gabbard be attacked by Kamala Harris and by the Democratic Party as an Assad apologist, still being chastised for just meeting with him. Where do you see this going for the Democratic establishment? I mean, they're still attacking her over talking to Assad, and simultaneously we're getting information that these chemical attacks were manipulated. Where do you see this going?
Well, I think that's a really great question, and I'm really pleased that Tulsi's running for president. I love her description of the Syrian war as a regime change war. That's an accurate description. The U.S. has sought regime change in Syria since the founding of the CIA. In fact, the first attempted CIA coup was in 1949 in Syria. It failed. The first successful CIA coup was 1953 in Iran, and that's caused a mess ever since. But Tulsi met with Assad. What's wrong with that? She's not an Assadist. She's opposed to the use of the U.S. military in regime change wars. I think that's a position that every member of Congress should take. Regime change wars are not legal. The only way you could have a legal war under international law is one of two things. One, you're attacked and you defend yourself. Or two, the Security Council authorizes it. That's the only two ways to have a legal war currently under international law. So every war the U.S. is involved in is an illegal war. And Tulsi Gabbard is telling the truth on that. And the way that the establishment is reacting to her shows that she is threatening. I couldn't believe Hillary Clinton's nonsense about her being a Russian agent. I mean, Hillary, please go away and don't come back out in public. I mean, Kamala Harris is showing herself to be a junior Hillary, another militarist, and I think by her attacks on Tulsi. And so I think Tulsi is standing up to it. It's not easy, but she knows it's not easy. She's standing up to it. She's going to stay in these debates. Seems like she's met the requirements of the next debate, which is fantastic. So her voice will be heard again. But I think that you can measure her impact by the criticism she's getting from these corporate Democrats. And they're criticizing her, and especially over this concept of regime change war, because that's what most U.S. wars are. And if that label gets out there and starts to stick, it's going to undermine a lot of U.S. foreign policy. And U.S. foreign policy is in trouble. U.S. empire is not succeeding. We're losing our unilateral power. The dollar domination is weakening as Trump abuses unilateral coercive measures or sanctions. That is forcing countries to find ways to do trades without the dollar. And when the dollar is no longer the reserve currency, it's going to have a tremendous and horrible impact on the people of the United States. Already the empire economy, which is what the U.S. has with mass weapons sales and theft of resources around the world, already the empire economy is not working for people in the United States. Jobs are going overseas. Corporations are leaving the country. Our middle America is suffering. That's because the empire economy is no longer working. And the U.S. empire is the largest empire in world history. And what's unique about it is that it's a secret empire. You never hear a politician in the United States talk about U.S. empire, mention U.S. empire. You never hear it in the media. And yet it's the largest empire in world history by far. Now that it's beginning to fail, it's beginning to be talked about in independent media. And as we talk about it more in independent media, the corporate media will have no choice but to acknowledge it and discuss how it's bad for the domestic economy, it's bad for the U.S. worker, and how it's undermining our ability to fund other projects, because 65% of federal discretionary spending is going to the military. We can't transition to a clean energy economy when we're spending 65% of discretionary spending. We can't fund improved Medicare for all or free college education or the kind of housing we need. We can't do any of that. And so the empire economy is not working for the people of the United States.
Yeah.
And so once that starts to get talked about, once we get that concept of U.S. empire out there and the impact on our economy, U.S. empire is going to be, it's already failing around the world. We're not winning any wars. We're able to create chaos, but we can't win wars.
Yeah.
And so many people who are empire experts predict we're in the last decade. By 2030, U.S. empire may no longer be there. That's hard to imagine, but that's what people who are experts on empires see the signs of coming, a crumbling U.S. empire. So our job as activists is to explain that to people and to use our limited power to fight to end U.S. empire in the most responsible way possible, with the least harm to the people of the world and the least harm to the people of the United States. That's a very big task because the country's in denial about it. So we have to awaken the country and educate them about it and find a way to end empire as responsibly as possible.
Yeah. And that's why we do here. And we can't thank you enough for being such an inspiration and doing the things you do, Kev. We just want to echo what you have to say. And the last Super Chat says, and thank you so much, Schultzy100, for the Super Chat contribution. It says, bless you and the peace movement, Kevin Zeese. And I think that's a great way to end the show. When you go back to Venezuela, will you bring the CONVO couch with you? Because we can do some good work. We want to go with you, Kev.
You already did it in the embassy, so why not in Venezuela?
Let's do it. Jonny Tsu, you got anything else for us before we get out? Kevin, tell everybody where they can find you, and then we'll just play us out.
All right, great. Popularresistance.org is kind of the linchpin for all of our work. You'll see our campaigns there. We have multiple campaigns going on healthcare and military and other issues. And we also have a daily digest, which people can sign up for and receive every day. And we do a weekly news analysis, our annual weekly newsletter, which I think is an in-depth analysis of key issues. So you can sign up for all that at popularresistance.org.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Kevin.
For Kevin Zeese, I am Pasta Jardula.
And Fiorella.
Jonny Tsu is on the ones and twos.
CONVO out. Bye, guys.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Kev. We love you.
Bye-bye. Take it easy.
Hey, Kev, hold on a second.